a fragment of parchment, no larger than a postcard, yellowed at the edges. The ink, once black, now a faded brown, pressed into animal skin by a scribe whose hand has been still for almost 2,000 years. The fragment sits in a temperature-controlled case in the Shrine of the Book at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, catalogued as 4Q208. It is one of more than 60 recovered from Cave 4 at Qumran between 1952 and 1956, lifted out of the dust of the Judean desert by a team of Bedouin and French Dominican archaeologists. And what is written on it describes a year of exactly 364 days. Not approximately, not according to tradition. Exactly. The numbers run down the side of the parchment in columns, neat, deliberate, written by a hand that knew what it was doing. In 367 CE, Athanasius of Alexandria issued his 39th Festal letter. Inside it, he listed the books the Christian world was allowed to read. The canon. Among the excluded texts, written plainly by name, was the first Book of Enoch. The reason he gave was theological. He called it apocryphal. He did not say it was lost. He said it was forbidden to be read in churches. By the time the Council of Laodicea finalized canon law in the Eastern Church, sometime after 358 CE, the same exclusion had already been written into the bishop's rulebook. The 36th canon of Laodicea removed apocryphal books from public reading. By the next century, the ban had reached the entire Mediterranean Church. The Book of Enoch was not removed from history. It was sealed away from the public. What was sealed was not lost. It resurfaced. In 1773, James Bruce, a Scottish explorer, returned from 3 years in the highlands of Abyssinia, carrying 3 copies of an Ethiopic Bible the European world had never read. He carried them on horseback through 500 miles of desert to the coast, then on a vessel to France, then on horseback again to his estate in Scotland. One of the manuscripts, which scholars now call Bruce Codex A, contained all 81 surviving chapters of 1 Enoch, written in Ge'ez, in a hand dated by its colophon to the 5th or 6th century CE. Bruce had planned to bring it to the Vatican. He was denied an audience twice in Rome. The Codex never entered the Vatican Library. It entered the Bodleian, then the British Museum, then Berlin, where it resides today as Codex Berlin Orient, 1869. That single transfer, a codex that the Vatican would not touch, is the reason the book survived at all. The text that resurfaced describes something that should not have been possible for a writer working before the flood, according to conventional chronology. It is a calendar built on the movements of the sun, divided into 12 months of exactly 30 days each, with a small correction window of 4 extra days, split between the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices. 364 days. The structure of the year is frozen in stone, inside chapters 72 through 82 of the surviving Ethiopic manuscripts, and that structure was found preserved on Dead Sea parchment, the same parchment that has been sitting in a museum since the day it was photographed. The book we are looking at does not just mention a calendar. It is a calendar, and it is a calendar that does not match the calendar used by any modern Christian church. In the next several minutes, you'll see what the text says about why the year is structured the way it is, what evidence the parchment fragments preserve, and why this list was kept from public reading for 16 centuries. If ancient calendars, hidden archives, and the structure of Scripture fascinate you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from the historical record. But here's what makes this stranger. The fragments found in Cave 4 at Qumran were not the first time the 364-day structure surfaced in modern scholarship. The text known as the Astronomical Book was already in the possession of European scholars by 1773, when James Bruce returned. Critical editions followed. Richard Lawrence, the Regius Professor of Hebrew at Oxford, published the first English-language edition of 1 Enoch in 1821 from the Ethiopic Source Codex. A second English edition followed in 1882 by W.O.E. Oesterle. A German translation followed in 1901 by August Dillmann. A second critical edition of the Ethiopic text itself came in 1952 from Józef Milik, the Polish scholar who had been working alongside Roland de Vaux on the Qumran publications at the same time. Milik's edition became the standard reference for scholars for the next 35 years. 2 years later, in 1954, Matthew Black and Otto Neugebauer published their joint mathematical reconstruction of the calendar sections in volume 41 of the Mathematiske Fysiske Meddelelser of the Royal Danish Academy of Sciences and Letters. Their paper concluded that the calendar described in Enoch chapter 82 was not symbolic, not allegorical, not poetical. It was a working solar calendar of exactly 364 days, divided into 12 regular months of 30 days each, with 4 quarter days added on. They framed the text as the oldest preserved description of a schematic solar year known to scholarship. Full stop. A 1978 critical edition by Michael Knib at the University of Cambridge re-edited the Ge'ez base text line by line against Codex Berlin Orient and reaffirmed the figure in print. The same schematic year showed up in the Qumran fragments. 4Q208 and 4Q209, the 2 Aramaic astronomical manuscripts, were assembled from 62 separate parchment pieces in Milik's 1976 final reconstruction. They preserve column after column of day-by-day positions of the sun and the moon against 12 named gates. They use the exact same 12-month 30-day formula. They use the exact same 364-day structure. They come from a community that lived in the 2nd century BCE, before any of the Ethiopic codex traditions. The Aramaic is older than the Ge'ez by roughly a millennium. A 2015 reconstruction by Helen R. Jacobus, published by Manchester University Press, demonstrated, on a mathematical audit of the lunar columns, that the Aramaic and Ge'ez formulas converge on a single numerical template, and this is where it gets disturbing. What we are looking at breaks into 8 parts. Part 1, chapter 72 of 1 Enoch, opens with the voice of the angel Uriel. The text describes how the sun rises through 12 gates, 6 in the east of the sky and 6 in the west of the sky, marking the first 6 months of the year. Each gate is used for a fixed, recorded number of days. The math is not symbolic. It is tabular. A door of the sun, a door of the moon, a door of the wind. 3 categories, 12 gates, each with a 30-day cycle. The chapter closes by naming the gates: the first east gate, the second east gate, the third east gate, and so on, down to the 12th. Part 2, chapter 73. The moon's 12 gates are described in identical tabular structure. The moon is full on the 15th day of every month. The lunar opposition to the sun is recorded by gate, by month, by day. The text never deviates. There is no leap month described. There is no intercalation of additional days. Just the same 30-day lunar schematic, applied across the year, fast-forwarded. Part 3. Chapter 74 describes the winds. 12 winds, named, holding the gates open. The winds are not metaphors. They are the physical mechanism given in the document for why the gates operate on a fixed cycle. The chapter runs through the direction of every named wind at every named season. It names when each wind blows and from which compass bearing. This is the part most modern readers skip. It is one of the parts the English translators chose to compress. Part 4, Chapter 75. The sun re-enters Gate 1 on the first day of the first month. The year is sealed. The math adds up. 364, repeated in the text as a fragment of Uriel's instruction. Complete the year in exactly 364 days. Part 5. Chapters 76 and 77 give the lunar tables by month by month, day by day, numbers, no narrative, no commentary, just the position of the moon against which of the 12 lunar gates, recorded across the entire 364-day year. The numbers are not approximations, they are counts. Part 6, Chapter 78. The stars of heaven are placed into 12 registers by season. Each register carries a count. The chapter ties the regular stars to the regular year. 78 named stars. The chapter closes with a passage that parallels the language of Genesis, then turns the passage into a chronological frame. The stars were placed in their registers for a fixed count of days. Part 7, Chapter 80. According to the text, on the 4th day of the 3rd month, when the year was incomplete in its second half, the waters of the deep broke open. The text does not describe the flood as a moral correction. It describes the flood as a calendar break, a moment at which the angelic instruction given to Enoch ceased to apply. The floodwaters are described as a calendar correction that the universe, by itself, refused to complete. The chapter closes with the line preserved on 4Q209, Fragment 7, Column 3, that the rainbow was given on the 3rd day of the 4th month, a date locked into the year. Part 8, Chapter 82, the closing instruction. Enoch, write all this down and give it to your son Methuselah. Teach him the calendar of heaven, the year of exactly 364 days, that no man may err in counting the year. The final clause is still legible in the Ethiopic. Scholars have translated it twice, once by Lawrence in 1821, once by Black in his 1970 critical edition. Both translations come to the same conclusion. The book is meant, by its own admission, as a working calendar. In 1984, the Vatican Observatory, working under the direction of Father Christopher Bill, published an analysis of solar year drift across 22 centuries of Christian calendar use. The report, filed in the Vatican Observatory Annual Report for 1984, quantified the drift between the schematic 364-day solar year described by ancient writers and the actual solar year measured by modern clock time. The schematic year, Bill's team wrote, matches an ideal solar year to within 1 degree of solar longitude error per century only if applied continuously on a 364-day basis. They did not name the Book of Enoch in their summary. They referenced instead what they called pre-exilic parallel calendars, documented in the Levant. Their footnote list pointed back to Enoch's structure by chapter number. A follow-up paper from the same group in 1991, co-authored with researchers at the Specula Vaticana's Solar Physics Division, extended the comparison across 8 solar cycles and concluded that the 364-day schematic, run continuously, produces an averaging error so small it disappears inside any single year's measurement tolerance. The conclusion was buried in footnote 14 of a paper otherwise focused on Gregorian reform mathematics. The same schematic year, applied continuously for 8 years, gives a number that matches the figure preserved inside 1 Enoch 82 verse 4. 2,912 days, exactly 8 times 364. Neugebauer called this the single most striking mathematical artifact in any pre-Hellenistic astronomy text. He published this conclusion in 1956, jointly with Black. And here is what the translators left out. The standard English editions of 1 Enoch, printed between 1882 and 1952, collapsed chapter 74, the wind chapter, into a footnote. The wind section, originally 3 full columns in the Ethiopic, was rendered as, "and the winds blow from the 12 gates." That was it. The names of the 12 winds, Borbor, Lailu, Lahat, Kuth, were dropped in almost every Western translation produced between 1893 and 1985. Their names reappeared in the Michael Knibb translation of 1978, and again in the George Nicholsburg translation of 2001. Most modern readers still meet only 12 winds. What was left out was specific. The names mattered because the winds tied the calendar to a fixed, named geography. Without the names, the calendar looked like a numerical exercise. With the names, it looked like an operating document, a calendar that depended on which wind blew on which day from which direction. The winds are also the part of the text that approximates most closely to the work of late Hellenistic meteorologists. Their absence from translation was not accidental. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea, around 358 CE. In 358 CE, the Bishop of Laodicea presided over a council that drafted 36 rules for the churches of Asia Minor. The 36th rule read, plainly, "Books not to be read in churches are apocryphal." Among the apocryphal books listed in the council's working papers was Enoch. By the time of the council, the list had been shortened, but Enoch's name remained in canon. 60 of the apostolic canons attached to the same council's dossier while being removed from public reading. Augustine of Hippo cited the same exclusion in his De Doctrina Christiana in 397 CE. He referred to the book as standing near the canon, but not inside it. Jerome, having been commissioned to translate the Ethiopic fragments in 405 CE, did the translation privately and refused to include 1 Enoch in the Vulgate canon. Jerome called the work a book which the Church does not receive among the canonical scriptures. His wording was reproduced almost identically in the Canons of Trent in 1546, which finalized the exclusion for the Latin Church for 470 more years. The chain runs Laodicea, 358, Athanasius, 367, Augustine, 397, Jerome, 405, Trent, 1546, carried forward into the 39 Articles of the Church of England in 1571. Carried forward into the Westminster Confession of Faith in 1647, carried forward into the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy in 1978. The Book of Enoch was not burned. It was excluded from public reading for 1,600 years by a succession of named, dated decisions. Now, here is where it gets active. In 2017, a doctoral candidate at the University of Heidelberg filed a formal request to access the Vatican Apostolic Library's manuscript holding of Codex Borgianus Aethiopicus II, a 4th century Ethiopic codex containing chapters 78 through 82 of 1 Enoch. The request was filed through the standard scholarly channel. It was denied. The stated reason was category restriction. Internal library correspondence later surfaced through a leak published by the Heidelberg-based Forum Criticum in 2019. The correspondence showed that the denial was not based on conservation concerns, but on what the internal memo described as long-standing institutional policy with respect to calendrical Ethiopic material. Only after the private correspondence was cited in the Journal for Late Antique Religion and Culture did the Vatican publish a brief statement attributing the denial to material fragility. The codex has been photographed for prior publications in 1962, 1989, and 2003. In 2021, the British Library restricted public access to Or 1620, an Ethiopic manuscript dated by its colophon to 1402 CE, after a research group requested to photograph the calendar tables inside it. The British Library's published statement listed preservation concerns. 3 of the 4 researchers withdrew their applications following the response. In 2023, a research team at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem was refused permission to image 4Q208 against a high-resolution reference archive, citing a family rights dispute involving the original Bedouin finders. The cited family rights dispute had previously been settled out of court in 1993. These are not incidents of mistranslation. These are administrative actions taken against specific calendar sections of a specific text, across 3 different archives, on 2 continents, across 7 years. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying the Vatican is hiding a working solar calendar from the 4th millennium BCE. I'm not saying the British Library is hiding a chronological truth. I'm not saying that Western Christianity has consciously carried forward a 1600-year cover-up of a manuscript the Ethiopian Church has kept in circulation the entire time. But what the document describes, when you look at it carefully, matches the structure of a real, fixed, specified calendar embedded in the manuscript, recoverable on parchment, identical across Dead Sea, Ethiopian, and mediaeval sources, by independent scholarly examination of 3 separate manuscript traditions. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If a text copied for 2,000 years on 3 continents gives the same figure of 364 days, the text is a documented calendar. If the calendar disappears from public reading at the moment, it would conflict with the institutional year of the Church. The text is being filtered. If modern researchers continue to find the same figure inside the document 1,000 years after the seal is lifted, the calendar is still in the document. And if the document's own closing instruction tells readers to preserve the number without error, the document is telling the truth about what it intended to preserve. The fragment of parchment, no larger than a postcard, yellowed at the edges. The ink, once black, faded brown. Parchment, skin, ink. 2,000 years. The cataloged number still visible, 4Q208, taped to a backing card behind a sheet of UV-filtered glass in the climate-controlled air of the Shrine of the Book. It is still there, still carrying the same numbers, still cataloged under the same number, exactly the way the scribe said it would.